Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC 288, Aljamain Sterling defeated Henry Cejudo via split decision in the main event, and immediately following the announcement of the decision in favor of Sterling, they brought Sean O'Malley in the cage for a stare-off with Aljamain Sterling, signifying that that is the next bantamweight title fight, and we're going to discuss the in the cage antics, which honestly I thought was a massive embarrassment to the sport. I'm not clutching my pearls over or anything. We'll talk about that in a second. But also, one thing I really want to key in on is something Aljamain Sterling said in the cage that really nobody is really talking about. We're going to discuss that. And I'm also going to give my thoughts on the matchup Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley for the bantamweight title. And I'm going to give an early prediction for that fight. So first off, you have Aljamain Sterling defeat Henry Cejudo. He wins via split decision. And while they're doing the post-fight interview, the UFC decides, let's bring Sean O'Malley in. Sean O'Malley comes into the cage. He stares down with Aljamain Sterling. He takes off his jacket. He hands it to Merab Dvalishvili, who is Aljamain Sterling's teammate. Merab puts it on in the background. I didn't even notice that live while it was going on. And then afterwards, Sean O'Malley and Merab kind of get into an altercation in the cage, screaming at each other, flipping each other off because Merab took his jacket and so on and so forth. And you kind of have like a little, altercation in the cage. Really nothing really happened, at least on camera that we really saw. And then you have them continuing the post-fight interview with Aljamain Sterling. My thoughts on this: I believe this is an embarrassment. I'm not sitting here and I'm not clutching my pearls and I'm not saying they should never do this again. This brought me PTSD from back at UFC 226. Daniel Cormier defeats Stipe Miocic for the heavyweight title. He KOs Stipe Miocic in the first round. And immediately after that, they bring Brock Lesnar into the cage. And Daniel Cormier and Brock Lesnar pushing and shoving and screaming at each other, trying to promote a future fight that inevitably never happens. Meanwhile, you have Stipe Miocic, who's a long-reigning champion, didn't get a post-fight interview. He wanted a post-fight interview. And, you're promoting a fight against a guy who's been out for years. And the last time he fought at this point in time, he tested positive for PEDs, which I thought was an absolute embarrassment to the sport. Now, this isn't as bad as that, but this brought me back to some PTSD from that moment in time, which I absolutely hated at the time. And I'm not a big fan of these in the cage stare downs afterwards. And I know some people are going to say, oh, well, they're just promoting the fight. And, oh, this went viral and, Merab stole his coat, which was funny. I thought Merab stealing the coat was funny and putting it on was hilarious. But honestly, how many pay-per-view buys do you think this is going to add to the fight? Is it going to add 100,000 buys? I don't think so. It's not. People who are going to buy the fight are going to buy the fight. Yes, does this add extra promotional material for when they go to make the countdowns, when they go to make, any of the commercials they do in terms of promoting this fight? Yes. But how many pay-per-view buys is this really going to add to it? I don't think it's a substantial amount. I don't think this is necessary. The people who are going to buy the fight are going to buy the fight. And the reason I hate this, and I know there's going to be some people down in the comments saying, oh, you don't like anything fun. You don't want anything fun to happen. There is people who watch this sport, whether it be fans or whether it be some MMA media personalities, cough, cough, Ariel Helwani, cough, cough, Mark Raimondi from ESPN, that want to turn the UFC into the WWE. They're constantly campaigning for popular fighters to get undeserved title shots, and they're constantly applauding when we have these weird antics where, oh, he entered the cage and, he took off his jacket and they're screaming in each other's face. That's what this subset of fans and some of these MMA media members want. They want the UFC to be the WWE. That is what they want, and I can't stand that. I absolutely can't stand this because I want this sport to be the best versus the best. And I know you say, oh, well, this really doesn't do anything. Sean O'Malley arguably could deserve a title shot as it stands right now. But I just hate moments like this where it's just so manufactured. You had, before the Aljamain Sterling Henry Cejudo fight, them saying, oh, they really hate each other. I mean, how many times are we going to hear this same story about how much they hate each other before the fight? Okay, when they actually don't hate each other. You see Aljamain Sterling, Henry Cejudo having cordial discussions after the fact. I understand they have to promote the fight, but You know, what's next? Are they going to send Sean O'Malley in there with a steel chair to smack Aljamain Sterling over the head? They're going to send him in there, you know, with a shillelagh. They're going to have Tim Welsh pop out from underneath the cage with a shillelagh to come back in there and help him attack Aljamain Sterling. Is that what we're going to start doing next? Are we going to start scripting corny lines like Colby Covington does already? Pay somebody from off the street to write up some corny lines to regurgitate in interviews? And it's just a slippery slope. And you have a situation where you have this altercation. I don't think it really does all that much for the fight. There's people who would disagree with me and say, it's going to sell so many pay-per-views because of this. That's not the truth. That's not accurate, and there's no evidence to back that up. People are going to talk about it. It's going to help get a little bit of promotion for the fight. But other than that, it's no more than basically some weird WWE altercation in the cage. Aljamain Sterling has his skill set. He's an elite level fighter. Sean O'Malley has his skill set. He is an elite level fighter. But I get it. You know, you want to have some type of, you know, promotional material. We don't need this. We don't need to be bringing fighters in immediately after another fighter won to have some altercation. That's the other problem I have with it. Aljamain Sterling, he just fought. He just won his fight. You shouldn't be bringing in another fighter to kind of steal the shine from that moment. I understand they want to capitalize on it and use it as a promotional push for the next fight. But I just think it's annoying. And it's horrible, and it's WWE style, and it's a slippery slope. You start doing that, next thing you know, there's other things going on. And you already have people recently, Ariel Helwani and other MMA media members, you know, complimenting on the entrances from one championship, the big stage and the entrances, you know, from one championship, and the dances, and they compliment Bellator on some of their stages and their pyrotechnics because they want to turn the UFC into the WWE. And just a quick fact for the people who don't understand this, because I guarantee this isn't something that's talked about a lot. The reason Bellator has those big stages, the reason one championship has those big stages is because it takes up seating room. They can't sell out arenas. So now they're taking up a large portion of seats with these entrance, you know, ramps and stuff like that. That is the reason they have them. UFC doesn't have a problem with that. They're going to sell out the arena on most cards. They don't need to have fake entrances with fireworks and flames popping up. They don't need that to be able to have a good entrance. And just my personal opinion, I know we're kind of getting into a topic for another video. There's nothing better than the UFC walkouts. I love the UFC walkouts through the crowd. I hate that look of a fighter walking down a ramp just hunched over, kind of smacking fans' hands. They're just hunched over. It looks terrible on screen, and I hate seeing it. And the MMA media, Ariel Helwani in particular, want to turn the UFC into the WWE. That's what they want to do. And some fans would welcome that as well. That's why they love, you know, some of the acts from like Colby Covington and some of the weird things that go on behind the scenes. Now, in terms of what's the next bantamweight title fight, it will be Aljamain versus Sean O'Malley. And this is a fight that I think is very interesting. But at the same time, I can't help but say, I don't think Sean O'Malley deserves a title shot. He beat Petr Yan in his last fight at UFC 280 via decision, split decision. He did not win this fight. This was a brutal robbery. And I know I've said recently, you can't call every close fight whose decision you don't agree with a robbery. That does not apply to this because this was not a close fight. I believe Petr Yan won this fight 30-27. It was a brutal robbery. I understand now Sean O'Malley has a win over Petr Yan, who was ranked number 1 at the time. And I don't have a massive issue with Sean O'Malley getting the fight because you look at the rankings right now, the true number 1 contender is Merab Dvalishvili. Well, Merab says, I'm not fighting Aljamain Sterling, but I wish the UFC would push that. I wish the UFC would make Aljamain Sterling versus Merab Dvalishvili. But if that's not happening, there's really no one else deserving right now. You have Corey Sandhagen, who's on a 2-fight win streak, a solid 2-fight win streak, but he's lost to Sterling and lost in dominant fashion. Petr Yan's on a losing streak right now. Marlon Vera just lost. Rob Font just got a win, but he kind of, beat a contender on his way up in Adrian Yanez. So there's really no deserving contender. So I really don't have a massive issue with Sean O'Malley getting this title fight. But it is a little bit unfortunate that you look at his resume. Outside of the Petr Yan win, he does not have a single win over someone currently on the UFC roster. His last win before that, Raulian Paiva, gone. His last win before that, Chris Montino, gone. His last win before that, Thomas Almeida, gone. So Sean O'Malley's only win against someone currently on the UFC roster is a robbery win against Petr Yan. But nonetheless, I still think this is a fun fight. I don't have a massive issue with it because at the end of the day, I've said this and I will stick to this. We have to go off what the judges say. You know, even though it is egregious sometimes, even though they are horrible decisions, we can't live in a fantasy world of a perfect world where I want to say Petr Yan won that fight. At the end of the day, the judges gave it to Sean O'Malley. And if you operate under that, he beat a guy who was ranked number 1 at the time, give him the title fight. But when I look at this fight, I think it's a massive mismatch. I think Aljamain Sterling's grappling will be the factor in this fight. It will be a massive advantage. And I just see Aljamain Sterling taking Sean O'Malley down and submitting him early. First or second round, most likely. But I do think there is something that a lot of people are overlooking. And I've said this in multiple videos. I said this in my UFC 288 post-fight. As much as Aljamain Sterling has an advantage on the ground over Sean O'Malley, I do believe that Sean O'Malley has that same level of advantage in the striking department over Aljamain Sterling. Sean O'Malley's striking is very, very good. And Aljamain Sterling's striking is not good at all, but he uses the grappling threat to set up the striking, and that's where he lands some of his strikes and, you know, has some success with his striking, even though it's not particularly aesthetically pleasing. So I do think this is a fight that Sean O'Malley can win. If you see Aljamain Sterling waiting in the danger with his chin up in the air, looking to, you know, enter and get a takedown, because Aljamain Sterling's wrestling isn't the best. It's very good. It isn't the best, and his entries are kind of sloppy. I could see Sean O'Malley catching him. I don't think it's going to happen. I think you're going to see Aljamain Sterling march across the cage, look for a takedown, find a takedown, and then find a submission. Maybe Sean O'Malley is able to be very tentative early and feint some knees and avoid the takedown in the first round, or maybe get taken down at the tail end and defend himself. But then I see a first or second round rear naked choke win for Aljamain Sterling. Second round, I think Aljamain Sterling will find that takedown. We'll revisit it when we get closer. I'll do a full breakdown and prediction. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. But right now I have Aljamain Sterling. You know, you look at Sean O'Malley, you look at the way Petr Yan was able to take him down with ease. And Petr Yan is prioritizing damage over control. Aljamain Sterling won't make that mistake. Aljamain Sterling will prioritize control and using his jiu-jitsu over damage and ground to pound. So Sean O'Malley, I just think he's going to have a lot of trouble getting out from underneath of Aljamain Sterling. So my early prediction is Aljamain Sterling. As far as what was said in the cage that I thought was very, very telling, that I haven't seen anyone really talk about, is there was some back and forth. And, you know, you heard Aljamain Sterling say, I'm going to drag your ass up and down this octagon. Which, I mean, if Aljamain Sterling was fighting Kron Gracie, that would be a mistake because Kron Gracie would do it to himself. But that's another point. You also heard Aljamain Sterling say, when Sean O'Malley was talking to him and saying, you better look better than that, I'm going to take your title, stuff like that. I don't remember the exact words that he was saying. Aljamain Sterling said, well, why did you turn down the fight then? And what that tells me, and there was dead silence from Sean O'Malley. What that tells me is Sean O'Malley was offered the title fight at UFC 288 and he turned it down. And so the UFC gave Henry Cejudo a title shot, but the UFC was willing to give Sean O'Malley the title shot over Henry Cejudo. And what that tells me is Sean O'Malley wasn't confident enough in his wrestling to take the fight. He wanted to take some time. Since that Petr Yan fight in October, he's training nothing but takedown defense. Nothing but takedown defense. Nothing but probably submission defense as well in case he does get taken down. And training his get-up game. And I think Sean O'Malley knew he wasn't ready. And he wasn't confident in a fight against Aljamain Sterling. At least not this early, as in May of 2023. He wanted more time. And it looks like now, according to what they were saying in the cage, according to what Dana White said, it's most likely going to happen in August in Boston. We're going to get Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley. My guess is headlining a pay-per-view. I would assume, but maybe it could be a co-main event, but I think it will be a headliner. The other option is potentially September, which Aljamain Sterling said he would prefer September, but Dana White seemed rather adamant it was going to be August. Even the commentary team was talking about it. But I just thought it was very interesting that Sean O'Malley had the opportunity to take this fight against Sterling at UFC 288 and did not take it. And I honestly think you heard Sean O'Malley's comments after the fight. Oh, I thought Henry Cejudo clearly won. I think Sean O'Malley wanted Henry Cejudo to win. I really think he wanted to win for a multitude of reasons. I think he thought that was a bigger fight because Henry Cejudo is cringy and talks a lot and tries to drum up fake WWE type beef. But also, I do believe he thought Henry Cejudo was a more favorable matchup and a more winnable fight for him because Henry Cejudo doesn't have the jiu-jitsu. He doesn't have the threat on the ground of the submission threat that Aljamain Sterling does. And Henry Cejudo really doesn't prioritize the wrestling as much as Aljamain Sterling does, prioritizing the takedown. Henry Cejudo likes to strike, and that's a much more favorable matchup for Sean O'Malley than Aljamain Sterling, who's going to come out there, come right across the octagon, and look for a takedown and start working for submissions immediately. So I think he was hoping Henry Cejudo would win this fight, and he was also hoping for a little bit more time to train his wrestling, train his takedown defense, and train his submission attempts or submission defense because he wasn't ready for an Aljamain Sterling fight in May of 2023. So he pushes it down the line another 3 to 4 months, gets that extra training. That's massive for him. That's massive for him. And Sean O'Malley is improving from fight to fight, but has he improved enough? We haven't seen him be super successful against elite competition. Don't get me wrong. I think the Petr Yan fight was very telling. Sean O'Malley did a lot well in that fight. He landed some good shots. He's shown that he is an elite level striker. He still lost that fight in my opinion, and he showed glaring holes in his takedown defense. And I believe he will lose that fight to Aljamain Sterling. And I believe he was not very confident in taking that fight as early as May of this year. So I think that's why it kind of got pushed down the line. I thought that was super interesting that Sterling said that right there in the cage. All of a sudden, Dana White's kind of shutting down the whole scenario. Sean O'Malley doesn't have anything to say back. And then it kind of ends. But that is pretty much my thoughts on the entire situation. I don't love the title fight for Sean O'Malley, but I don't hate it. And I just hate it, the whole WWE altercation in the cage between Aljamain Sterling and Merab Dvalishvili and Sean O'Malley. Everyone's screaming and yelling at each other. A bunch of grown men screaming and yelling at each other. Sean O'Malley flipping people off. Not a big fan of it. Not the end of the world. Wanted to make a video discussing the whole, circumstances surrounding this fight in general and give you guys an early prediction. Let me know what you guys thought about the altercation in the cage after the fight. Let me know what you think about Sean O'Malley getting a title shot. And also let me know, who are you picking early prediction, Sterling versus O'Malley? Who are you taking in that fight? Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.